Have you ever trusted someone so deeply that you couldn't even imagine life without them? Have you ever given your loyalty, your secrets, your faith, only to realize one day that the person you trusted most was only waiting for the right moment to stab you in the back? That's exactly what happened to me. It wasn't just betrayal. It wasn't just disappointment. It was something far deeper, something that cracked my soul open in ways I never thought possible. And it all began on one unforgettable night. That night, I stood alone in my room staring out at the city lights. The streets below looked alive. Cars rushing past, neon signs glowing, people laughing in the distance. To the world outside, it was just another ordinary night. But for me, it was the night that changed everything. My phone buzzed. A sound so ordinary, so harmless, yet it carried the message that would shatter my world. I remember reaching for it slowly, almost lazily, unaware that I was about to open a wound that would never fully heal. One glance at the screen. One message. And just like that, everything I thought I knew came crashing down. The words on that screen felt like knives carving into my chest. My hands trembled. My throat tightened. I could feel the blood drain from my face. It was him. The man I trusted most. The one I had defended, supported, believed in. The one I called brother. And his betrayal wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't an accident. It was deliberate, calculated, planned. I sank into my chair, the message still glowing in the dark. I wanted to deny it, to believe it was some misunderstanding. But deep inside I knew this was the truth, and it burned. Do you know what betrayal feels like? It's not just sadness. It's not just anger, it's a storm. A hurricane that rips through your chest, tearing apart every memory, every promise, every laugh you ever shared with that person. One moment, you're standing on solid ground, and the next, the floor beneath you collapses, leaving you free falling into darkness. That was me, alone in my room, shaking, breathless, broken. But here's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't just break you, it changes you. He thought I would crumble. He thought I would stay silent, powerless, destroyed. That I would just accept the pain and fade away. What he didn't know was that his betrayal had done something he never intended. It had lit a fire inside me. A fire so fierce, so relentless, it would consume everything in its path. A fire that would burn down every wall he had built, every lie he had told, every victory he thought he owned. He thought I was weak. He thought I was finished, but he had no idea. He had just awakened something unstoppable. I sat there that night, the city still glowing outside my window, and I made myself a silent promise. I promised I would not cry forever. I promised I would not beg, or plead, or wait for an apology that would never come. I promised that he would regret the day he betrayed me, not because I wanted revenge for the sake of revenge, but because he needed to understand. He needed to feel the weight of the pain he had caused. He needed to watch everything he loved slip from his hands the way he had ripped everything from mine, and most of all, he needed to see me rise. That night became the turning point of my life. Before it, I was naive. I believed in promises. I believed in loyalty. I believed in him. After it, I believed in myself, in my strength, in my fire. Because sometimes the worst night of your life becomes the beginning of your greatest transformation. And I knew my story wasn't ending here. No, it was just beginning. I first met him years ago, back when life felt like a puzzle I hadn't figured out yet. I was still stumbling, still learning, still trying to carve my place in a world that seemed far too big for me. And then he appeared. He came into my life like a storm, fast, loud, and impossible to ignore. He carried himself with a confidence I envied, a charisma that could light up an entire room. When he spoke, people listened. When he promised, people believed. And when he looked at me, he made me feel like I was finally part of something bigger. He wasn't just a friend. From the very first moment, he made himself look like a savior. I remember those early days so clearly. We were both dreamers, chasing ambitions that felt just out of reach. We spent long nights talking about the future, sketching out plans on scraps of paper, whispering promises in the dark when the world was quiet. He told me things like, "We'll rise together. No matter what, I've got your back always. We're more than partners. We're brothers." And I believed him. God, I believed him with every fiber of my being. We started building things together. Small steps at first, then bigger ones. Projects, ventures, risks that most people wouldn't dare to take. But with him it always felt safe. Because I thought we were equals. I thought we were untouchable. When I doubted myself, he lifted me up. When I wanted to give up, he pushed me forward. When the world said no, he looked me in the eye and said, "We'll make them say yes." That's how trust works. It's not built in grand moments, but in those small, quiet reassurances. In those nights of laughter, those mornings of shared struggle, those endless talks where two people start to believe they're unstoppable. And slowly, I began to hand over more than just my time and energy. I handed him my loyalty, my faith, my secrets. I let him see parts of me no one else did. My fears, my doubts, my insecurities. I trusted him not just as a partner, but as family. Because sometimes life gives you people who feel closer than blood. That's what he was to me. A brother I never had. But here's the thing about trust. It's dangerous, it makes you blind. It wraps you in comfort so tightly, you don't even notice the cracks forming in the walls around you. You don't see the shadows creeping in. When you trust someone completely, you don't question their late-night calls. You don't question their silence when you need answers. You don't question the little mistakes, the broken promises, the things that don't quite add up. You excuse them. You justify them. You cover for them, because in your heart you believe they could never betray you. That's exactly what I did. Looking back now, I can see the signs. I can replay those moments that should have made me pause, should have made me ask harder questions. Like the time he brushed off an important meeting, leaving me to handle everything alone. He said, "You're better at this than me anyway," and I laughed it off. Or the time he hesitated before sharing numbers, offering excuses instead of transparency. He said, "Don't worry, I've got it handled," and I trusted him. Even the way he sometimes looked at me, not with brotherhood, but with something colder, something calculating. I ignored it. I told myself I was imagining things, because trust doesn't let you see the truth. It blinds you with loyalty. But in those days, I didn't know. All I knew was the bond we had built, the partnership we had formed. We celebrated wins together. We endured losses together. And each time he found a way to convince me that we were stronger than ever. I can still hear his voice sometimes echoing in my mind. We're a team. Nothing can come between us. Those words, they felt unbreakable. But words are just words. And promises can be broken. For years we worked side by side. Long hours, sleepless nights, endless sacrifices. Together we climbed step by step, turning small dreams into bigger realities. And for years I never questioned him. Not once, why would I? He was my brother, my partner, my other half in this fight. But little did I know, while I was building bridges, he was digging tunnels. While I was pouring trust, he was collecting secrets. While I was looking forward, he was planning something behind my back. The cracks were there all along, I just refused to see them. If I could go back to those early days, I'd tell myself to be careful. I'd tell myself not to hand over so much, not to trust so blindly, not to ignore the instincts whispering in the back of my mind. But I can't go back. And maybe that's the cruelest part of betrayal. You never see it coming until it's too late. At the time, I thought we had built something unshakable. I thought we were writing a story of brotherhood, of loyalty, of shared victories, but in reality, I was writing the opening chapters of my own downfall. Because the man I trusted most, the man I called brother, wasn't building with me, he was building against me. And one day soon, all those cracks I ignored would tear open wide, and everything we built together would come crashing down. It started small. The kind of things you brush off at first, a missing detail here, a broken promise there, a forgotten meeting. An excuse that didn't quite make sense. A delay that came out of nowhere, nothing big, nothing obvious. Just little things, the kind of things you tell yourself are normal because you don't want to think otherwise. But deep down, in the quiet parts of my mind, something whispered, something isn't right. At first I ignored it. I told myself I was overthinking. I told myself I was tired, stressed, imagining problems that didn't exist. Because the truth is, betrayal isn't something you want to see, you fight against it. You protect yourself from it by denying it. No, not him, I told myself. He wouldn't do this to me. He's my brother. He's my partner. He's the one person I can trust. I wanted that to be true so badly that I silenced every doubt in my heart, but doubts don't stay silent forever. They grow louder. They demand to be heard, and mine grew louder with every excuse he gave me. When I asked a simple question and he dodged it, when I called him late at night and he didn't answer, only to show up the next day with a flimsy explanation. When I caught whispers behind closed doors, conversations that stopped the moment I walked in. Each time, I wanted to believe it was nothing, but my gut told me otherwise. The night that changed everything came quietly. It was late. Too late for ordinary business. I was walking past his office, the door slightly ajar, light spilling out into the hallway. I wasn't planning to stop, but then I heard it, his voice. Not the friendly, confident voice I was used to. Not the voice of a brother. This voice was different, sharp, low, calculating. The kind of tone a man uses when he's planning something dangerous. I froze. I didn't want to eavesdrop. But the words stopped me cold. I couldn't hear everything. Just fragments. He doesn't know. Keep it hidden for now. We'll move when the time is right. The way he spoke sent chills down my spine. He wasn't talking about me. He was talking against me. I stood there in the shadows, my heart racing, my hands shaking. Part of me wanted to storm in, to demand answers. But another part of me didn't want to know. Because the moment you face the truth, you can't unsee it. And I wasn't ready. Not yet. So I walked away, my chest heavy with a weight I couldn't explain. The next morning, he greeted me with his usual smile. That same charming grin I had trusted for years. He clapped me on the back, joked about how busy we were, acted as if nothing had happened, and for a moment, I almost believed him. That's the thing about betrayal. It hides behind masks. It wears the face of friendship. It pretends to be loyalty, even as it twists the knife deeper. But once you've heard the truth, you can't ignore it. From that day forward, I started noticing things I had never paid attention to before. The way his eyes flickered when I asked a direct question, the way he kept certain documents to himself, the way his phone calls always seemed to end when I entered the room. It was like lifting a veil. Suddenly, all those little cracks I had ignored began to look like fault lines ready to shatter. Still, I hesitated because betrayal isn't easy to accept. It's not just about losing trust. It's about losing a part of yourself, the part that believed in them, the part that felt safe with them, and so I fought against the truth. Maybe I misheard him that night. Maybe I'm just tired. Maybe I'm imagining things because I've been under too much pressure. That's what I told myself over and over again, because admitting the truth would mean admitting that the person I trusted most was already turning into my enemy. But the truth has a way of breaking through no matter how hard you fight it. One evening, we sat down to finalize a project we had been working on for months. I noticed numbers didn't add up. Details were missing. When I pressed him, he laughed it off. He said, "You worry too much. Just trust me." And for the first time, his words didn't comfort me. They chilled me because trust was exactly what he had been feeding on. And I was finally beginning to see it. The doubts had turned into certainty. Something was wrong, something.
Big, and I couldn't run from it anymore. Looking back now,
I realized that was the real breaking point. Not the betrayal itself, but the slow unraveling before it. The way lies creep in quietly, wearing the disguise of friendship until you can't tell the difference anymore. That's how betrayal works. It doesn't strike all at once. It seeps in like poison, slow, silent, deadly, and by the time you taste the bitterness, it's already too late. I wanted to believe in him. I wanted to keep the picture of brotherhood we had painted for years. But the voice I overheard that night, it never left me. It replayed in my mind again and again, each time sharpening the blade of truth. He wasn't my brother. He wasn't my partner. He was my betrayer. And soon enough, I would learn just how deep his betrayal went. Because the cracks weren't just cracks anymore. They were earthquakes waiting to destroy everything we had built together. And I was standing right in the middle of it. The truth came crashing down one morning. I remember it vividly. The light creeping through the blinds, the sound of the city waking up outside, the smell of coffee on my desk. It should have been an ordinary day, another step forward on the path we had built together, another day of work, of planning, of pushing toward the future we had promised each other. But it wasn't. That morning, everything I thought I knew was ripped apart. I opened an email. A forwarded message from a client. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then the words began to sink in. The deal I'd been working on for months, the one I had poured my time, my energy, my very soul into, was gone. Not just gone stolen, signed away under his name. My work, my idea, my effort, all claimed as his. My hands shook as I scrolled through the details, the signatures, the dates, the carefully worded agreements. All of it perfectly planned, perfectly executed, not an accident, not a mistake, but by design. I pushed my chair back, my chest tight with disbelief. I told myself there had to be some explanation. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe he had meant to tell me. Maybe somehow this was all part of our plan. But deep down I already knew. This wasn't business. This wasn't partnership. This was betrayal. I tried to breathe, but the air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on me, suffocating me. I pressed my palms against my desk, trying to steady myself. My heart wasn't just breaking. It was shattering into pieces so sharp they cut me from the inside. And then came the final blow. A document I had written. A private one. Filled with ideas I had only ever shared with him, but exposed. Not just used, but twisted, reshaped, and signed under his name. The betrayal wasn't silent anymore. It was loud, brutal, unmistakable. He had taken everything, not just the work, not just the deal, but my trust, my loyalty, my belief in him. He had used me, drained me, and the moment I was no longer useful, he threw me aside. I can still remember the rage that boiled in my chest. The disbelief mixed with pain, the shock mixed with fury. All those nights of planning together. All those whispered promises. All those times he had looked me in the eye and said, "We'll rise together." Lies. Every single one of them. I thought about the nights we stayed awake building dreams. I thought about the sacrifices I had made, the times I had defended him, the times I had chosen loyalty over logic. And now I realized, I hadn't been building with him, I had been building for him. And once I had built enough, he no longer needed me. That was the moment it hit me. This wasn't just betrayal, this was war. Because betrayal isn't just about losing what you built. It's about realizing that the person who stood beside you wasn't just careless. They were an enemy in disguise. And once you see that truth, you can't unsee it. I confronted him. Of course I did. I stormed into his office, the contract clutched in my hand, my voice shaking not just with anger but with heartbreak. "How could you do this?" I demanded. "How could you take everything we built and claim it as your own?" He didn't flinch. He didn't apologize. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, calm, collected, almost smug. And then he said the words that will haunt me forever. "This is how the world works. You were too slow, too trusting, too naive. I did what had to be done. Don't take it personally. Don't take it personally." Those words sliced deeper than any blade ever could, because how could I not take it personally? He hadn't just stolen a deal. He had stolen my faith, my loyalty, my very sense of brotherhood. And the way he said it, as if I was nothing more than a stepping stone, as if I had never mattered, broke something inside me that could never be fixed. I walked out of that office in silence, not because I had nothing to say, but because I knew words wouldn't matter anymore. The man I had trusted wasn't my brother, wasn't my partner, wasn't even a friend. He was an enemy, a predator who had been circling me all along, waiting for the right moment to strike, and now he had drawn blood. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The anger coursed through me like fire. The betrayal played on repeat in my mind, every word, every detail, every smug look on his face. I felt destroyed. But beneath that destruction, something else began to grow, a resolve, a fire, because betrayal doesn't just break you. Sometimes it remakes you. And as the hours passed, my pain hardened into something else, something sharper, something unstoppable. He thought he had won. He thought he had destroyed me. But he was wrong. I knew, from that moment forward, that this wasn't over. He had declared war without realizing it, and I was going to fight back, not with anger, not with noise, not with desperation, but with silence, with patience, with precision. I wasn't going to beg him to return what he stole. I wasn't going to plead for his loyalty. No. Was going to show him what betrayal really feels. Like, I was going to take everything he cared about, just as he had taken everything from me, and when the time was right, he would look at me the way I had once looked at him, with disbelief, with heartbreak, with the crushing weight of loss. That morning had started like any other, but it ended with the death of trust, the death of friendship, the death of brotherhood, and in its place was born something new. A hunger for justice, a thirst for revenge, a fire that would not go out until he was brought down. Because sometimes betrayal doesn't end you. Sometimes betrayal awakens you, and I was awake now, more awake than I had ever been. The moment the knife went in wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of his downfall, and I swore that he would never see me coming. People think revenge is about anger. They picture shouting, smashing things, storming into a room and exposing someone in a fit of emotion. They imagine catharsis in loudness, but that's a story for movies. Real revenge, one that lasts, one that actually changes the world around you, is about clarity. Anger burns bright and loud, but it also burns out fast. Clarity lasts. Clarity is cold. Clarity is a blade you carry quietly, protected, sharpened until it cuts precisely where it should. After the betrayal, the blaze of fury came and went. What remained when the smoke cleared was a focus so sharp it hurt. It felt like ice under my skin, steady, ruthless, unblinking. I became a student of him, not in the friendly way we had once shared notes and ideas. No. I watched him the way a surgeon watches a heartbeat on a monitor, careful, patient, learning every rhythm, every spike, every tell. I watched how he greeted people, how he laughed, the names he dropped, the tremor in his voice when he lied. I sat through his presentations, read his public posts, scanned old messages, pieced together habits. I retraced years of conversations in my head until I could predict his moves like a chess player predicting an opening. Because once, I had been his strength. I had been the one who covered his blind spots, the one who smoothed his edges in front of clients, the one who built scaffolding around his ego so it wouldn't topple. I knew where he hid his lies because I had helped hide them before. I knew which people he leaned on when he needed excuses. I knew the places where his confidence was only a mask over worry. Step one was information. I started collecting it like a person collecting firewood in winter, slowly, methodically, knowing there would be a long night ahead. I organized emails, saved screenshots, wrote timelines. Every inconsistency, every late-night text, every odd transfer of money, it all went into a file. I created a map of his life and the routes he used to hide the truth. Step two was distance. For a long time, you absorb someone else's rhythm. You share a heartbeat. To rename your own heartbeat, you need space. I became cautious with my words. I stopped offering him help I didn't have to. I stopped being the first to answer a call. I pulled back under the pretense of focusing on other things. He didn't notice at first. He never noticed unless something threatened him directly. That distance gave me the room I needed to move without being seen. Step three was allies. Revenge done alone is amateur hour. There's a weakness in solitude. So I reached out quietly, carefully. People who had been burned by him. People he had lied to in the margins. People who were tired of his charm, weaponized into manipulation. Not all of them wanted retribution. Some wanted fairness. Some wanted closure. I listened. I learned which stories were true and which were exaggerated. I stitched our narratives together into a fabric that couldn't be dismissed as petty revenge. But I didn't make a spectacle. I didn't rally a mob. Instead, I built credibility. I ensured every claim we could make was documented and defensible. In business, reputation is currency. I would not spend mine recklessly. Step four was patience. I set traps that didn't look like traps. I let opportunities come to me. When he boasted about a new deal, I asked quiet questions to the people around him. Subtle, polite, the kind of curiosity that looked like professional interest rather than malice. When he trusted someone to handle a contract, I learned how that contract was structured. When he flaunted a relationship with a big client, I learned the backstory of that client's real concerns. I began to plant seeds, small, seemingly harmless suggestions placed where they would grow. A question to a partner about transparency, an offhand remark to a supplier about process, a recorded voicemail left intentionally vague, nothing that would snap and prove wrongdoing on its own, but everything that, when assembled with other pieces, would form a picture impossible to deny. Meanwhile, I strengthened myself. I rebuilt my finances quietly, by cutting losses and protecting what I still controlled. I reconnected with old contacts and renewed relationships I had taken for granted. Revenge is not only about tearing someone down, it's about ensuring you don't fall with them. I prepared my own ground so that when the collapse came, I would stand on solid earth. There was also a moral reckoning I had to navigate. I asked myself where to draw lines. I refused to become what he was. The plan was surgical, not cruel for the sake of cruelty. I wanted him exposed, accountable, and emptied of the power he had held. I did not want to be him, trading pain for pain. The fire inside me was not for revenge alone. It was for justice, for balance. That moral clarity shaped every decision I made. Technically, my plan had layers. The outer layer would be reputational, facts and witnesses, timelines and paper trails, presented to the right people in the right order. The middle layer would be financial, tracing funds, exposing conflicts of interest, showing the money flows he had thought no one could follow. The inner layer was personal, cut ties, reclaim respect, redistribute power. Each layer operated on a different timeline but aimed at the same point, removing the foundation he stood on. There were days I felt like I was playing a role, moving around like a ghost inside a life I once lived openly. But it was liberating in a strange way. The old naive me, generous, trusting, unquestioning, was gone. In his place was a version of myself honed by fire. I learned to speak softly and strike precisely. I became a strategist who used patience as a weapon and silence as armor. One of the most effective moments came from a single, well-timed question. Not confrontational, just a quiet inquiry at a board meeting that prompted someone else to reveal a pattern. When that pattern met the records I had quietly compiled, a door opened. It wasn't spectacular. There were no dramatic confrontations, no shouting matches. Only the slow, inevitable crumbling of an image that could no longer be propped up. And through it all, I never lost sight of the final goal: to take everything he cared about the way he had taken everything from me. Not out of spite alone, but to teach him the fragility of what he had built with someone else's labor. He had treated people as disposable. I intended to show him that nothing built on lies can last. The fire inside me burned, but it wasn't chaotic. It was a controlled burn, designed to leave the soil ready for something new. My plan wasn't about spectacle. It was about consequence. It was about returning balance to a ledger he had thought only he could write. I would not rush. I would not panic. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing me unravel. When the day finally came to strike, it wouldn't be with a shout. It would be with a click, the gentle snap of a carefully placed mechanism completing its circuit. And when that click sounded, everything he had depended on would start to fail one by one until he had nothing left to hide behind. For now, I waited. I sharpened, I planned, and I fed the quiet, steady fire inside me, knowing that when it burned it would be brilliant, precise, and utterly unavoidable. It began with whispers, not loud ones. Not the kind you could point to and say, there, that's the moment. Real sabotage lives in the cracks. It starts as a murmur at the edge of a conversation, a tiny doubt that grows teeth the more people chew on it. I learned to be surgical with those murmurs. I learned to place them where they would grow without looking like I planted them. A seed of doubt here, an offhand remark in a hallway about transparency, a missing document there, a contract that somehow wasn't produced during a routine audit. A carefully worded question to a junior associate that nudged them to double-check numbers. Each action was small, almost invisible, but arranged together they started to form a pattern no one could ignore. I created shadows where he thought there was only light. He had been so sure of himself. Arrogance has a way of blinding you to the quiet forces that dismantle your throne. He strode into rooms like an emperor, expected applause, loved the mirror that reflected his success back at him. In that mirror, I planted tiny cracks. I didn't shout or accuse. I let other people's unease do the work for me. At first, he didn't notice. He was too busy performing, too busy smiling and shaking hands and making deals. That was his greatest weakness, performance without accountability. He counted on being untouchable because he had learned how to make things look flawless from the outside. So I worked from the inside. I started with facts, immutable, boring things that don't bend to charm. I shared spreadsheets with auditors that had been quietly corrected to show discrepancies. I forwarded emails that, when read by someone with context, painted a different picture than the one he broadcasted. I nudged a vendor to send a confirmation copy of a delivery he had claimed, and then let the discrepancy sit like a splinter under his skin. But facts alone were not enough. People dismiss numbers when they come at you as an attack. They question motives. So I mixed the hard with the soft. A sympathetic conversation in the right corridor, the right memory shared with a mutual friend. I thought X was strange too. Another person chimed in. Another. Suddenly it wasn't a lone voice, it was a chorus. People began to look twice. That chorus was the mirror I'd shattered into a mosaic, each piece reflecting a hint of truth. There were legal channels too, quiet and clean. I fed information to a lawyer I trusted, facts, documents, timelines. The lawyer asked careful questions and wrote careful letters. Those letters arrived in polite envelopes and formal language, but they carried the weight of official scrutiny. When corporate counsel starts to ask questions, confidence becomes a liability. He felt the change like a draft under a door he thought shut. At the same time, I targeted relationships. The people around him were his scaffolding. I didn't need to topple the whole structure at once. I only needed to loosen a few crucial bolts. I reached out to those who had been marginalized by him, the ones who had quietly paid for his ego with their reputations. I reminded them of facts they had forgotten or been pressured to ignore. I gave them language to speak their truth without sounding vengeful. Some were hesitant. Others were hungry for fairness. A few had been waiting for someone to give them permission to speak. I moved like a shadow, never leaving fingerprints. Anonymous tips landed on desks. Quiet emails hinted at conflicts of interest. A whistleblower report here. A discrepancy flagged there. None of it was dramatic on its own. But like rivulets eroding a cliff, the small streams carved paths until the rock finally gave. Timing was everything. I learned when to push and when to wait. When his calendar was full of public triumphs, I didn't thrust accusations into the light. I let the rot work in private, where appearances matter most. When he was vulnerable, after a high-profile meeting, when a rumor was already circulating, I nudged the conversation a notch. A carefully timed question in a board meeting, a polite request for documentation, a casual "did you see that?" dropped in the right group chat. I also used his own tools against him. He loved spectacle. He loved headlines. So I fed selective information to journalists I trusted, not sensationalist tabloids, but reporters who valued accuracy. They asked the right questions in the right way. When a journalist reaches out, the perception of risk shifts. Partners start to get nervous. Investors call. Deals stall. People begin to ask, what don't we know? And that is the precise moment confidence begins to crack. It was intoxicating, yes, to see the first fissures appear. Deals he had taken for granted were delayed. A major investor requested an independent review. A supplier he bragged about started asking for additional proof of process. Allies who had once smiled in his presence now avoided eye contact. He tried to mend things with charm. Smiles, reassurances, grand gestures, but charm cannot fix evidence. There were nights I replayed his reaction in my head, the way he leaned back in his chair when someone questioned a number, the way his jaw tightened when a partner requested an audit. He was starting to move like someone who felt the ground shift beneath him, but did not know how deep the chasm had grown. And there were quiet, personal victories that no one else saw. An intern who had been gaslit into believing their memory was faulty finally found courage to confirm a timeline. A supplier who had been paid late admitted to a colleague that payments had been rerouted. Small truths accumulated into an undeniable story. All the while, I kept my face neutral. I continued to answer when he called, to ask about his weekend, to laugh at the jokes he thought cemented our past. That performance was important. If he suspected me, he would close ranks, become paranoid, and hide deeper. Let him believe we were still brothers. Let him feel safe enough to make mistakes. Then came the moments where the machinery I'd built began to hum. internal meetings where the right people ask the right questions. An accountant casually mentioning we want clarity on vendor X when X had been the conduit for something he tried to mask. A board member requesting a review of a high-profile contract, one he had cited in speeches. Each inquiry felt like a gear turning. Each turn brought us closer to the center where his lies had been stitched together. He started to crack. Not dramatically, no shouting, no scenes. Instead, subtle changes. Less swagger, shorter answers, forced smiles. He started to micromanage, trying to cover the gaps with a flurry of activity. But frantic energy is not the same as control. Control comes from confidence, and his confidence was draining away like water from a bucket with a slow leak. Then there was the day when several of his closest allies began to ask for a meeting. That meeting was presented as a routine check-in, but the air was different. The questions were quieter, more pointed. The lawyer who had quietly compiled the evidence sat at the table with a calm I had trained him to maintain. He asked one direct question about a transaction that could not be explained. In that room, the map of his life began to unfold like a disassembled machine. I watched from the edges of that world, unseen. I felt a strange mix of vindication and sorrow. This was not a moment of glee. It was a reckoning. I had not wanted to harm people arbitrarily. I had wanted truth, and now truth was arriving at the doorstep. As news of the probe spread, partners withdrew with careful statements about ongoing reviews. Deals froze. Invitations stopped. He called me, voice hollow, asking for help he had never asked for before. I listened. I gave no counsel. He had chosen his path. The sweetest part of revenge isn't when they fall. It's not the drama of a collapse. It's the long, slow realization that the person you thought indestructible was built on sand. The moment he looked around and saw friends gone, accounts frozen, reputation eroding. Then, in that small, private second, he realized who had pulled the strings. When he finally understood, it wasn't in a boardroom full of noise. It was in a look. A silent, shocked recognition passed across his face the night a close associate confronted him with an email trail he couldn't explain. The expression was brief, but it carried a lifetime. The surprise of a man who finally understood that his fate had been guided by a hand he had trusted. He had no idea who held that hand, and that more than any public unraveling was the triumph I had been cultivating, the knowledge that he would be awake at night, piecing together how the world had turned against him, the knowledge that his certainty had been wrested away, the knowledge that somewhere in that quiet, a person he had once called brother had been steering the wind that toppled his sails. I didn't yell. I didn't gloat. I let the truth speak in its own relentless tone. People who care about facts and integrity did the rest. In the end, the fall was not a spectacle. It was a quiet, inexorable unmasking, one that made him feel the cold, clean air of accountability for the first time. I pulled the strings, yes, but I did it with care, with restraint, with the deliberate intent to restore balance rather than to revel in ruin. Because when the dust settled, I did not want to be left clutching the empty shell of a victory. I wanted the world around him to reflect the truth, plain, undeniable, and cleansed of the gloss he had painted over it. And when the final pieces fell into place, when his empire began to crumble in front of people who had once admired him, what rose from the aftermath was not merely my triumph. It was a reminder. No one builds alone and no one escapes the consequences of what they have done. The final strike came on a day he thought he had won. It was almost poetic, the way arrogance makes people blind to the storm gathering behind them. He walked into that hall like a king returning from conquest, shoulders squared, smile broad, voice booming with confidence. He believed he had secured a deal that would finally cement his empire. The deal that would silence every doubt and crown him as untouchable. He had no idea that the ground beneath him had already rotted through. I was there, standing in the background, silent and composed. My face revealed nothing. My heart didn't race, my hands didn't shake, because I already knew. The dominoes were lined up. All that remained was the moment someone flicked the first tile, and that moment was today. The hall was filled with people who had once called him friend, ally, partner. They greeted him politely, but their smiles were thinner now. Some avoided his gaze. Others whispered in corners. He mistook their quiet for respect. He thought their restraint was awe. He didn't notice that their restraint was distance, the kind that people put between themselves and a crumbling tower. He stood at the podium, presenting charts, numbers, big promises. He bragged about profits, about connections, about the future he claimed he alone could deliver. His voice was steady, rehearsed, confident, but I could see the cracks. The slight tremor when he said certain names. The way his hand brushed the notes too often as if to reassure himself. I almost pitied him. Almost. Because while he spoke about strength, his strength had already been dismantled. The people in that room weren't listening to his words anymore. They were remembering the letters they had received, the documents I had placed in their hands, the reports from auditors, the questions from lawyers, the whispers from journalists. They weren't hearing him. They were weighing him, and they had already decided he was guilty. The moment came quietly. A single question from the back of the room, spoken in a calm, professional tone. Could you clarify this figure here? It was simple, harmless on the surface, but I knew that question was a blade, sharpened and ready. He smiled, as he always did, brushing it off. Of course. That's just a minor adjustment, nothing unusual. Another question followed. This one sharper. Then another. And another. Each voice that spoke up wasn't random. They were people I had positioned. People who had seen the evidence. People who had once been his allies and now had reason to doubt him. Their questions circled him like wolves closing in on prey. He tried to smile. He tried to control the room. But the harder he fought, the more the cracks showed. His explanations contradicted each other. His tone grew harsher, more defensive. Sweat beaded on his forehead. The empire he had built with lies was unraveling, thread by thread, in front of everyone. And then came the blow. One of his closest allies, a man who had defended him countless times, stood up, papers in hand. His voice was steady, cold, final. These documents, they don't match what you've presented. The silence that followed was deafening. He froze, his face drained of color. His mouth opened, then closed. For the first time in years, he had no words. I watched him flounder, reaching for excuses, for charm, for that old charisma that had once carried him through any storm. But none of it worked now. Because the truth had been laid bare, undeniable, irrefutable. His allies turned their backs. His partners cut ties. The deal he had bragged about only minutes earlier slipped through his fingers, withdrawn on the spot. His reputation, the very foundation of his power, shattered in a single merciless blow. And then, his eyes met mine. It was like time stopped. In that moment, he understood. The silence between us said everything words never could. He saw it in my face. The calm, the patience, the fire that had once been pain but had hardened into purpose. And he realized the truth, that the person he thought he had destroyed was the very person who destroyed him. His gaze faltered. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Not the fear of losing money or status or reputation, but the fear of seeing the ghost of his own betrayal staring back at him. Alive, stronger than ever, holding the strings of his downfall. He tried to look away, but he couldn't. Our silence bound him tighter than chains. He knew. I knew. And that was enough. People around us shifted, whispering, shaking their heads. Some looked at him with disappointment, others with anger. A few looked at me, not because they knew the full story, but because they could sense the power shift. The man who had once controlled the room was now a hollow figure, exposed and powerless. He stepped down from the podium, stumbling slightly, clutching his papers as if they could save him. No one reached out to help. No one offered comfort. He was alone, utterly, devastatingly alone, and I watched, calm, silent, steady. This wasn't joy. It wasn't gloating. It was justice. The universe balancing its scales. Do you know what the sweetest part of revenge is? It isn't the moment they fall. It isn't the applause or the whispers or the headlines. It's the exact second they realize who pushed them. And I saw that realization in his eyes. The shock. The disbelief. The regret. He had thought I was gone. Broken. Finished. But I was still here. And I was the one who ended him. He left that hall a ruined man. His empire crumbled in the days that followed. Contracts canceled, accounts frozen, partners withdrawing in droves. The press tore him apart, piece by piece, until nothing remained of the golden image he had once flaunted. But none of that mattered as much as that single moment. That silent exchange of truth between us, because in that moment he wasn't just defeated, he was finished, and I was free. When the dust settled, I thought I would feel joy. For years I carried that vision, the image of him falling, of his empire burning down to ashes, of the world finally seeing him for what he truly was. I imagined laughter bubbling out of me, relief washing over me like cool water on a fire. I imagined victory tasting sweet, like justice served on a silver platter. But the truth? Revenge doesn't heal the wound. It doesn't bring back what you lost. It doesn't fix betrayal. All it does is close a chapter. The hall emptied that day like a battlefield after the war was over. Papers scattered across the floor, half-filled glasses left behind, whispers echoing as people hurried away. No one looked at him as he slumped out the door. No one dared to speak his name. The man who once commanded every gaze now faded into shadows, small, diminished, irrelevant. And there I was, still standing. For a moment I just stared at the empty podium, at the microphone still humming faintly, at the silence pressing down on the room. I thought victory would roar like thunder. Instead it whispered, quiet, hollow. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just breathed. For the first time in years I could breathe without feeling his shadow over me. That was when it hit me. I didn't win because I brought him down. I won because I survived. Survival sounds simple, but those who've been betrayed, who've been broken, know it isn't. Survival means standing back up when the world shoves you to the ground. It means walking forward even when your legs tremble. It means facing the mirror when shame claws at you, when the lies they told about you feel louder than your truth. He tried to erase me. He tried to bury me. But I lived. That was my victory. Not the sight of his fall, but the fact that I was still here to see it. The days that followed were strange. The news exploded with stories of his collapse. Headlines screamed, photos circulated, old allies rushed to distance themselves. He became the cautionary tale, the scandal, the name everyone whispered about but no one defended. People came to me quietly, some with apologies, some with admiration, some with nothing more than curiosity. They wanted to know how I did it, how I survived, how I managed to turn the tide. I gave them nothing, because what they didn't understand is that revenge isn't a trophy you display. It isn't something you brag about. It's a scar, one you carry on your skin, one that will always remind you of the fire that burned you. And scars don't vanish just because your enemy finally bled. At night, I would lie awake staring at the ceiling, replaying everything, not his downfall, but the moments before it all began. The laughter I once shared with him, the trust I once placed in him, the dreams I once believed we were building together. That was the part revenge couldn't touch. The wound of betrayal isn't just about what they did to you, it's about what they stole from you. The innocence, the trust, the pieces of yourself you can never get back. And no matter how spectacularly he fell, those pieces were still gone. That truth hurt more than anything. But as the days turned into weeks, I began to notice something else. Life started to breathe again. The weight that had pressed against my chest for years began to ease. The constant fear of his shadow looming over me, of his lies spreading, of his power crushing me, it was gone. I could walk down the street without glancing over my shoulder. I could meet people's eyes without wondering what he had told them. I could laugh, quietly, cautiously at first, but laugh nonetheless, and without guilt tightening in my throat. Freedom didn't come with fireworks. It came with small, quiet moments of peace, moments I had forgotten how to cherish. One evening, I stood on my balcony as the sun set, the sky painted in shades of orange and red. The city moved below me, alive, busy, unaware of the war that had just ended in its heart. And I realized something: revenge was never the destination. It was the bridge that carried me out of the fire, the bridge that helped me reclaim my voice, my strength, my story, the bridge that closed the chapter so I could start another. And maybe that was enough. Do I still feel the sting of betrayal? Yes. Some nights I still hear his voice in my head, still feel the ache of trust broken. Some mornings I wake up and the anger is there, raw and sharp, but it no longer defines me. Because betrayal may wound you, but survival transforms you. I am not who I was before. I am not the broken soul he left behind. I am something stronger, not because of him, but in spite of him. People ask me now, do you regret it? Do you regret what you did to him? I always answer the same way. No. But I also don't celebrate it. Because revenge isn't about celebration. It's about closure. About drawing a line in the sand and saying, this is where it ends, and for me, it did end. That chapter is closed. His name is no longer a chain around my neck. His shadow no longer haunts my steps. What's left after revenge isn't joy. It isn't triumph. It's something quieter, something steadier. It's freedom. I learned something important through all of this. The real victory was never about watching him fall. The real victory was about standing back up myself, about refusing to let betrayal define me forever, about taking back the pen and writing the ending in my own hand. He fell, yes, but I rose, and that's what was left after. So here's what I've learned. Betrayal is one of the deepest cuts you'll ever feel. It doesn't just wound your heart, it wounds your faith, your trust, your very sense of self. It shatters the foundation you thought was solid, and it leaves you questioning everything, your choices, your worth, even your instincts. It breaks you in places you didn't even know existed. But here's the part no one tells you. It also teaches you. When someone you trusted betrays you, you see the world differently. The mask slips. The illusions burn away. And for the first time, you see who truly stands beside you and who never did. At first, that truth feels cruel. It feels like the world is punishing you. But in time, you realize betrayal isn't just an ending. It's a revelation. It reveals the cracks you ignored, the lies you swallowed, the strength you never knew you had. Revenge? Yes, it feels powerful. In the moment, it feels like justice. It feels like you've finally taken back control of a story someone tried to steal from you. But the truth is, revenge is only the spark. Real power is walking away stronger. Real power is rising from the ashes with scars that tell a story of survival. Real power is becoming untouchable. Because betrayal changes you. It hardens you where you were once soft. It sharpens you where you were once blind. And it teaches you the hardest, most valuable lesson of all. That your strength was never in the hands of another person. It was always in you. So if you've ever been betrayed by a friend, a partner, a family member, anyone you trusted, remember this. It's not the betrayal that defines you. It's not the scar they left. It's not the silence they forced you into. It's what you choose to do after. You can let betrayal make you bitter. You can let it cage you in fear, or you can let it shape you into something stronger, wiser, unshakable. The choice is yours. As for me, I chose to rise. I chose to take the pain and turn it into clarity. I chose to let the fire burn away my weakness instead of my spirit. I chose to become someone who can stand alone, unbroken, untouched by lies, and maybe that's the true lesson betrayal taught me, that no one can take away who you are unless you hand it to them. So here I stand, not as the person who was betrayed, not as the person who got revenge, but as the person who survived it all and walked away stronger. And if you're listening to this, if you've been through the fire yourself, let this be your reminder. Betrayal may cut deep, but it cannot destroy you, not unless you let it. Choose to rise, always.